Hey guys, so right now I'm just going to start off doing a couple oil streaks along these, I guess, vision ports that are on the rear side of the hull. And I start off first I'll do the staircases here, or little ladders that go up. And I'll start by putting a small dot right underneath. And take a brush dipped in some oil thinner, and then dry brush it on a piece of towel until most of it's gone. And then I just go through and swipe down once. Then if it's needed, just keep swiping multiple times and make sure you try and keep it nice and straight. Okay, so after adding a very faint rust streak under that vision port, I'm going to go ahead and put some of the Cadmium Red on a fine pointed brush. And then since this is a vibrant color, you want to put a small amount, and then you want to make sure it's under the waterline, the black waterline where the hull red portion would start. And what I like to do is try and keep it in line with this rust streak as if it were to keep going down. Hey guys, so I've gone ahead and done the front side of the ship here, and all these vision ports, most of the streaks on the vision ports that have streaks are done with burnt sienna, oil paint, and the darker streaks from the top were done using either Payne's Gray and raw umber. And then lastly, these parts on the hull red portion, like this kind of discolored red and this faded red color right there. Not sure if you can see it, but should be able to. Those were done with the Cadmium Red oil paint. Okay, so I finished up the hull, and the next thing I'm going to be weathering are the main cannons. So here's the finished product for the main cannons, and this is how it looks. So I used the burnt umber, as I said earlier, and then gently brushed back and forth to get them along all of the bolts, as seen here. Then a couple of streaks on the rear end, and some more pronounced ones on the sides where there would be bigger objects, as well as making sure I get some on the front end between the two cannon barrels, just so that part's not blank. So now I just have 2 more cannons to do, and I'll also probably do some minor weathering on the smaller cannons. Hey everyone, so I finished up the oil weathering and the dot filters on the hull and all of these superstructures. So now what I'm going to do is use some just regular washes to emphasize the detail in all these air vents as well as the windows like on the control tower. Just, also using washes on these very small windows are much easier than painting just to avoid cleanup and all that and getting, amounts of paint on the gray section. Using a black wash there would just keep it nice and clean. So the washes I use are, originally I've began by using Vallejo washes, but since they're acrylic they tend to dry really quickly and it's harder to get rid of tide marks and all of that. So I've moved on to using some enamel washes, but I still do use these a lot. But also started using some enamel washes because you can blend them around and use the thinner to get rid of the excess and, have more control over where it goes. I just finished doing all the black dots or black washes on the inside of these windows, as well as the dark brown wash that go on the air vents on all the superstructures. So this is how the control tower looks with the slightly darkened, the wash to slightly darken the windows just to emphasize them a little bit. So that's how it looks. And then here is how the grill looks, or the air vent, after having putting a wash of a dark brown color. So I'm back and I finished clear coating pretty much everything on the ship. So all the superstructures, all the hull, all the cannons and all that have been flat coated with just the testers clear. And then now, since that's all sealed up, I'm pretty much going to go ahead and do the last part of, the weathering stage, where it's not as much weathering for aging, but just like bring out detail and all that sort of stuff, and to like break up the, gray color. So I'm going to be using a lighter gray and dry brushing over things like hangar doors and like sharp corners and all that sort of stuff, just, so that I can, keep adding more detail to the model and not have it look so bland. So the color I'm using to dry brush over the dark sea gray is just sky gray, and it's quite lighter so you can see it. It's the same thing than what you see on this hangar door. So I'm going to cover how I did the rigging, and again, as I mentioned in the previous video, the rigging was done using Easy Line, which is an elastic rigging material, which is really flexible and won't sag or snap if you press down on it. So here, I'm pressing down like probably half an inch and nothing's happening. So when you do this, you want to figure out like the right amount to pull it and the right amount of tension to apply onto the rigging material. So you want to have a good balance to where it won't sag, and to where it won't put like too much pressure on the mast and they won't like cave inwards, or they won't start falling inwards and stay straight. And then once I figured out the proper tension to put them on after kind of experimenting a little bit, I used some just super glue and put a little dot on one of the masts where the rigging material would begin, and then apply one end of the rigging material onto that point and let it dry for a couple of minutes. And then once it was dry and could resist just a couple of tugs, I would go and do the same process, apply a dot and then the rigging material right there, and cut more length than I needed. So there would be just like probably an inch or two that fell off the edge, and I would go in with clippers and just cut that off. Once all the rigging was done, I let it dry for an hour or so till when the super glue hardened. And I went over with a fine paintbrush and the dark sea gray color and just painted over the clear super glue so that the mast didn't, just so that it blended in and there were no clear glue spots on the model. So that's how I did the rigging, and again, it's a great material. I'd definitely use it again. And again, see, I can really press this all the way down to the bottom of the deck, which is like 3 or 4 inches. Or no, not 3 or 4, just like 2 or 3 inches. And it's really flexible. The railings right there, at every couple inches or so, I left a little spike from the sprue and didn't cut it off flat, so that I could drill a hole for my pin vise into the hull and use it as a locating pin to help guide the railings. And I cut them off like it's sections that were about 3 inches long or so to make it more manageable, and used super glue, which I kind of smoothed along the bottom edge of the railing so that I could glue it onto the ship, and it held on really well, and they're really sturdy. So here's the Arado 196, the lifeboats, and the crane. So here you should be able to see this wire there. I actually rigged the wiring or cables that would loop around the crane. So I wrapped it around the hook on top, which isn't focusing, but I wrapped it around this part and followed through the bottom to just make a cable or like pulley system as on a normal crane. Then these lifeboats just were glued in place with super glue, and I applied a little bit of dust pigment on them to break up the like brown tone on them. And then lastly, here is the Arado 196, which is on the cradle and glued onto the catapult. So this concludes the build of the Tamiya 1/350th Bismarck, which is a really enjoyable kit to build, especially for one from the 70s, which, you know, it's an old model, but, you know, still can compete with some of today's standards, especially with the photo etch and the wooden deck. So I hope you enjoyed the build. It was, you know, pretty fun and much harder, or not much harder, but much more lengthy than building a tank. But on the other hand, I'll probably stick to aviation and tanks, just because it's quicker and I enjoy the weathering procedure on those. So great build, and these Tamiya kits are really good, especially their ships. I know they came out with a new Yamato with new tooling, which seems really nice and kind of tempting to try out, but it'll take a long time to build that. As a side note, there are 2 things I want to point out. So I've barely skimmed, you know, barely even started this, but Dornier 335, part of the cockpit, and then the bomb bay. So Tamiya, one of their Tamiya's 148th series aircraft. And then the start of a mini art Valentine, which was actually a door prize from an IPMS show, and it's a really nice kit with an interior for the turret and for the driver's area. So I've, you know, barely started, but just the drive sprocket and a couple of the interior parts, which aren't glued in. I'm just storing them in the chassis. So those are 2 things I've planned for the future, possibly a cockpit video on the Dornier, and more likely a interior video on the Valentine. And the reason I'd like to do that is because I also have a Tacom King Tiger, which I purchased, and would like to make an interior video for that, and feel the Valentine would be a good way to practice. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, and you stay tuned for many of the more builds I'll be doing in the future. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.